Hi, this is Nancy Desmond. I was in a different time zone, mentally at least, 1 hour behind. And so I thought I didn't realize I was late, and I apologize for that. So let's get started here. I wanted in the webinar to provide some context for you regarding the BRAIN initiative in terms of both the opportunities for expanding our understanding relevant to health and disease, to talk briefly about the BRAIN initiative itself, give you some information related to the RFA, and then finally there'll be an opportunity for some general questions from the webinar participants. So first, background. As you all know, brain disorders affect all of us. There are many neurodegenerative disorders that for which we don't have good treatments. There are cognitive and affective disorders, which many of which we have very poor treatments and no recently and no new good treatments, as well as neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, intellectual disability, and injury and insult-induced disorders like PTSD and TBI that are affecting so many people currently in the military service. So the burden of diseases in the United States is really remarkable if you look at the data. And this slide shows you the leading categories of DALYs for the year 2010. Now, DALYs is an acronym for Disability Adjusted Life Years, and it's a measure of overall disease burden, which is expressed as the number of years lost due to ill health, disability, or early death. And what we see here is that neuropsychiatric disorders, including mental and behavioral disorders and neurological disorders, accounts for roughly 19% of the total U.S. DALYs in 2010. That's greater than these other categories, which often are thought of as the biggest problems in the U.S. Think about this in terms of age also. You can see that the cumulative DALYs here on the y-axis for mental and behavioral disorders is particularly high because many of them occur early in life, and then they persist for a long period of time. So you see that those disorders are really a significant challenge for us. So this is really great. Brain disorders are the #1 source of disability in the United States, with many individuals being affected. And the rates are increasing, as you probably already know. And the cost to those serving in the military of long-term post-traumatic stress syndrome and TBI is very challenging. The costs are also increasing. There's an estimate that the cost of dementia annually is $200 billion. And as the population ages, this is only going to increase. The challenge for the current century is to deal with chronic non-communicable diseases like brain diseases. This will be what infectious diseases were in the last century. So brain disorders, both those of neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative origin, were most disabling and the most costly of these chronic diseases. We really do not know enough about the brain to meet this challenge. As a result, we have the BRAIN initiative. The BRAIN scientific plan here, BRAIN 2025, a scientific vision. This was published in 2014 with the idea that over a 10-year period, there would be major advances made in our understanding of the brain. The first 5 years are intended to emphasize the development of technologies that are needed to rapidly advance our understanding of the brain, and the second 5 years is intended to emphasize discovery-driven science. The awards under this BRAIN initiative were made in fiscal year 2014, which means that they were made in the calendar year 2015. So we are now in here of funding opportunities. And we're starting to think here at the NIH about the fact that we're going to be transitioning to emphasizing discovery-driven science. This report, the Brain 2025 report, which is available online, provides a lot more detail than I can present to you in the next few slides. So I would encourage you to review this report to give you more background information that could be relevant to you as you're preparing your application. Summary here, a synopsis, if you will, of the report. The focus is really on circuits and networks. For the first year, they're emphasizing the development and validation of technology, and then with a gradual increase in the emphasis on problem-driven neuroscience. And there are basically kind of three ways to think about parcel out the goals of the Brain Initiative. One is to map the cells and circuits of the brain. This is to measure the electrical and chemical patterns within these circuits, and then to put this all together to understand how all of these cells and circuits and their fluctuating patterns generate thought, action, and what the brain is known to do. So I've identified 7 high-priority research areas, which I'm going to briefly go through here because these are important for you to understand in thinking about how your research project would align with the goals of the Brain Initiative. The first is diversity, to identify and provide experimental access to the different brain cell types so that we can understand their roles in health and disease. That are doing cell census in various species and trying to understand the many, to categorize the many neurons and glial cell types that are in the brain and their transcriptional components, for example. Goal is to map at multiple scales to generate circuit diagrams that vary in the level of resolution from the resolution of the level of a synapse to the whole brain. To begin to brain in action by developing a dynamic picture of the functioning brain through development of improved methods for large-scale monitoring of neural activity. So to demonstrate causality, that is, to link brain activity to behavior using very precise tools that will alter neural circuit dynamics. The fifth priority area is to identify fundamental principles to produce the conceptual foundation so that we can understand the biological basis of mental processes by developing new theoretical and data analytic tools. Neuroscience, so that we can begin to understand the human brain using new and innovative technologies and to treat its disorders and develop integrated human brain research networks. And in the seventh area is to go from, if you will, from the Brain Initiative and its focus on technological and conceptual approaches to brain and to integrate these to discover how dynamic patterns of neural activity be, if you will, cognition, emotion, perception, and action in both health and disease. So the description and background information related to these goals in the Brain 2025 report. In addition, on the Brain Initiative website, which is listed here at the bottom of this slide, there is information about all of the funded awards, including links to the abstracts of these awards. And they're organized by the different goals, which help you also understand how the NIH is thinking about accomplishing the objectives of the Brain 2025 report. In addition to scientific goals, the Brain 2025 report also has some educational goals. These are much less specific than the scientific and technical goals. However, they do flavor the expectations of the RFA that we'll be talking about today. The first is an real strong emphasis on the importance of acquiring quantitative skills. The report writers felt that this is an area where many people being trained in brain research these days are inadequately prepared for the future. The second is to ensure that the tools and technologies and methods that are developed under the BRAIN initiative are integrated into the training of individuals who are currently in graduate school and postdocs. And finally, the BRAIN initiative report importance of considering the ethical implications of neuroscience research as we begin to think about the use of interventional tools in human neuroscience. The ethical implications become more obvious, I would say, and it's an area where there is a notable gap in both our training of individuals and in having an adequate pool of well-trained individuals. I want to talk about the RFA and to give you my perspective on some important components of the RFA. So of this RFA very generally is to enhance the training of promising postdocs early in their postdoctoral training period. That you could consider is any area that's aligned with the BRAIN initiative, including neuroethics. So it is important to note that alignment means that it needs to fit within one of the goals, the high-priority goals that I have previously talked about. We're encouraging individuals to be risk takers a bit, if you will, and to cross traditional areas of expertise. I'm interested in encouraging individuals who have received training in quantitative disciplines like physics and chemistry and the maths to join in and conduct research on the brain. So to accomplish the goals of the BRAIN initiative, we need well-trained individuals who can easily cross traditional boundaries and do it effectively, and who can employ quantitative and computational approaches to questions about the brain. So we're really interested in receiving applications from those who have received graduate training in a wide variety of disciplines, for example, physics, chemistry, computer science, engineering, biology even, neuroscience, and ethics. So this is certainly not intended to be an RFA only for those getting advanced degrees in neuroscience. So I would just note, because I happen to work at the NIMH, that this is not intended only for individuals doing research that is relevant to the mission of the NIMH. This RFA is intended for individuals conducting research relevant to the BRAIN initiative, which is quite broad, and within the interests of a number of institutes at the NIH. Some details about the RFA. These are all in the RFA, by the way, but just to remind you, I would request that you send me via email a letter of intent by February 15th of 2017. The reason we request a letter of intent is that it helps us get an idea of the number of applications we're likely to receive, and this helps us get a head start, if you will, on preparing for the review that will have to be organized to occur the late spring, early summer. Applications are due March 15th, and we anticipate that the earliest start date for these awards would be in September of 2017. So to spend a moment talking about how long the project duration. The NIH policy is that postdocs may receive up to 3 years of NRSA support in aggregate. And what this means at the postdoctoral level. What this means is that you're currently supported on an institutional training grant or would start to be supported on an institutional training grant before this F32 award would begin. You need to subtract the number of months you've been supported on that T32 from the duration of the individual fellowship award. Component, not very interesting, but important, is to keep in mind who is eligible to apply for this funding opportunity. Needs to either be a citizen of the United States, a non-citizen national, or a permanent resident of the U.S. by the time of award. What this means is that if you are not, if you are currently applying for permanent resident status, and you anticipate that you receive it by the time of award, you may apply if you meet the other eligibility criteria. One component of eligibility is prior postdoc experience. So as it says in RFA, on the due date, individuals may not have completed more than 6 months of postdoctoral training as measured from the date when you completed all of your doctoral degree requirements. There is a little bit of wiggle room in this 6 months. We're not going to count literal days, but I would encourage you to send me an email to discuss this and get my feedback rather than to assume that everything will be okay. In the application, you are instructed in your biosketch to indicate the date on which you either completed all of your doctoral degree requirements or you anticipate that they will be completed. So SARFA is for early postdoctoral training. And is that? Some of you may know that generally postdoctoral fellowships at the NIH don't have the stringent eligibility windows associated with the application. And the thinking in all of this is that we really are interested in maximizing the training potential of this funding opportunity and the award for you. And the longer that someone remains in the same laboratory, the less training potential there is. That given the 6 months of postdoctoral experience, which is the maximum allowed, and the time window between when the applications would be submitted and the earliest start date, there would be roughly about a year or so that would be the maximum time in the postdoctoral lab that we would be considering here. So I want to point out that you don't need to wait until you already have your degree to apply. You can apply before you complete all of your terminal doctoral degree requirements. However, you should expect to complete all of these requirements within 1 year of the application due date. And given we're expecting applications from people who are quite early in their postdoctoral training or haven't even joined their postdoc lab yet, we are not expecting there to be preliminary data in the application. It's safe for you to include preliminary data, but we are not expecting it. We do expect, and I'll talk more about this later, is that you demonstrate that the project has some feasibility to it, and that you can talk about in terms of the expected outcomes and alternative outcomes, what you do if the project didn't go in the direction that you anticipate. So, for example, let me just read something to you from the RFA itself. Under the review criteria under the training plan, it says, does discussion of expected results and potential pitfalls and alternative outcomes provide confidence that if an important component of the research is unsuccessful, the applicant is likely to have a viable direction for continuing the project? That's an important thing for you to think about as you put your application together. Your project may not be safe, if you will, so it's not like we certainly aren't expecting you to have done studies already, but we want to see how you're thinking about how you would handle the situation if things don't turn out as you might expect. I want to talk about some of the expectations of the RFA, and these are all laid out in the RFA itself, primarily in the section called Funding Opportunity Description. So we're expecting to see a research and training plan that is relevant to one or more of the goals of the UpBrain initiative. It focuses on a research area and or skill set that complements your existing expertise and skills and broaden your knowledge and skills. In addition, that the training will be using cutting-edge tools, theories, and or approaches that are aligned with the BRAIN initiative. So what do I complement your existing research expertise and skills? We're looking to see if you're going to, the postdoctoral experience is going to really stretch the expertise that you have. So, for example, an applicant who already is really skilled in molecular neuroscience might propose a research training plan emphasizing systems-level training. Or someone could have been working on protein structure, if you will, as a graduate student, and now is going to propose to do genetic analyses in zebrafish or something like that. Someone in physics or statistics may propose a research training plan that is emphasizing computational approaches to neuroscience and getting experience on the quote-unquote side of neuroscience in the postdoctoral training period. We're expecting to see formal training that will enhance the rigor of the proposed research. And what I mean by that is formal training in experimental design, quantitative perspectives, and analytical tools. Don't envision this to be some third arm on your project, but rather that this would be integrated into your research plan. So more strong mentorship. It really is okay to have more than one mentor if you need to have more than one mentor to accomplish what you wish to accomplish. If you have a team of mentors, then the role of each mentor should be clearly defined and appropriate given their expertise. If your mentor hasn't transitioned a postdoc to a faculty position, and generally that will happen if the mentor is a junior faculty member, then you really need to add a more experienced individual as a co-mentor. There's a frequent issue that is raised at review of fellowship applications, so I would encourage you to try to avoid that one. I would note that you do not have a history of collaboration with your primary mentor based on this RFA. We read that there will be appropriate training and career development opportunities proposed in the application. Appropriate here means opportunities that would fulfill your training needs and help you achieve your goals, including your professional goals, and goals related to acquiring the so-called soft skills that are needed to be an effective scientist. Be strong institutional support and commitment which is in part reflected in the adequacy and appropriateness of the resources and facilities for the proposed project and for your training. Mentor training plan that will facilitate your transition to the next career stage. And here we're looking for a plan to enhance your professional skills and ensure you have what you need to be able to transition to the next career stage at the end of the F32 award. The training plan should document the need for and the value of the proposed training in relationship to your career goals and your prior research training. Mentor to develop a very strong scientific project that is integrated with a comprehensive training plan. The goal is for you to become a subject matter expert in your proposed research area, to acquire new technical skills, learn to incorporate quantitative approaches to answering research questions. We explain a strong foundation in quantitative reasoning, methods, statistics, and analytic techniques that are appropriate for your research and efficient for you to be able to generate robust and reproducible data. It's conducting research using state-of-the-art tools and methods, and really strong understanding of those tools and methods as well. Opportunities to present your research at national meetings, opportunities to publish as first author. I also mean a plan to do these things. Interact with members of the scientific community at scientific meetings and workshops, and finally, the skills that you need to transition to the next stage of your career. This training plan should be the launch point, if you will, for the next stage of your career. Talk briefly about the mentor and the mentor's role, because for this funding opportunity, there are some very specific expectations that are outlined in this RFA that are not stated in the usual NIH F32 funding announcement. So we're encouraging you to select a primary mentor with whom you haven't collaborated already. During your doctoral training, that is. We're not saying that if you have just joined a postdoc lab that you cannot have as your primary mentor the head of the lab in which you currently are working. The goal here really is to maximize training potential, and training potential is generally enhanced if you're not working with the same person you've already worked with for a number of years. In addition, this RFA is specific to the BRAIN initiative. The expect that the primary mentor will have research expertise that is relevant to the goals of the BRAIN initiative, and thus can provide an appropriate environment for your research training. The reviewers are going to evaluate the appropriateness of the mentor as part of their assessment of the scientific and technical merit of your application. So it is worth spending a little time thinking about this. And again, having more than one mentor is fine if that is appropriate for what you're trying to do. I would suggest that you develop a committee that is that probably more than 2 or 3 people, because it adds additional logistical challenges to work effectively. There are always exceptions to every one of these general recommendations. So I wanted to talk about responsiveness, a request for applications from the NIH. And that means that the NIH has the ability to assess if the application is addressing the minimally responsive to the goals of the initiative. And for this initiative to be responsive, application must be, the research that's being proposed must be relevant to the scientific goals of the BRAIN 2025 report. There is a required application component that we will assess to determine responsiveness. A description of the relationship of the proposed research and training plan to one or more of these goals. This component is described in section 4.2, Other Project Information, Other Attachments of the Funding Opportunity. If you do not include this other attachment with your as part of your application, it will automatically be considered not responsive. Program IH, who are working on this initiative, will be reviewing the information that is provided in this description and determining if the application is relevant to one or more of these goals. If staff do not find the application to be responsive, it will not be reviewed. How can you ensure that your application is likely to be responsive before you submit it? And that you do. That you do this not the day before you're going to submit your application, but some number of weeks before you're going to submit your application, that you send me the information that's listed here on the slide. Your current biosketch, a draft of your specific aims. They do not need to be the final, very final, polished set of specific aims, but something that is a good reflection of what you expect to propose. The name of the proposed mentor, a paragraph-long description of how your training and research will complement your prior training. Recall that this is an important component of what we'll accomplish with this RFA, is that we will expand your research training so that you, at the end of this, have a fuller skill set. A description of the tools and approaches that you're going to use in your project. Sometimes this can be hard to discern just from the specific aims, and no more than a paragraph or a few bullets. And finally, a short description of the relationship of the research you're proposing to the BRAIN 2025 goals. And what we do is that we will review these and we will provide you with feedback as to our assessment of responsiveness. This is also the opportunity for us to provide you with technical assistance, as we call it, on the training plan that you're proposing, what kind of coursework, meetings, who's going to be on your mentoring team, etc. So I would encourage you to send this information to us sooner rather than later, so the feedback we provide you can be considered and integrated as appropriate into your application. So, as always, there are many instructions for any application submitted to the NIH. Very much encourage you to read the instructions in the RFA for each section of the application. There is RFA-specific information that is being requested for most of the sections that are required components. This is just any F32 application to the NIH. And I would also underscore that your sponsor, you need to bring the fact that there is RFA-specific information to the attention of your sponsor, because some of this information is in the section that the sponsor will write. So for the research training plan, the research strategy starts out with instructions that tell you to relate the proposed project to the BRAIN initiative. And it's about how it is not expected that you will include your own preliminary results. However, applicants are encouraged to address technical feasibility, document previously published work that support the project and the technical approaches you want to use, to describe potential pitfalls and describe alternative approaches should the proposed approach not be viable. So it's a bit different than the standard instructions. You'll need to take a look at the general instructions for instruction guide for fellowships, because the funding announcement unfortunately doesn't include all instructions that you need. He will be sending an email tomorrow with helpful links, and we will include this as part of that email with helpful links. Point out a couple of items related to the expectations for what the sponsor is going to describe in terms of specific information. Sponsors are supposed to describe their qualifications to train a postdoctorate who seek mentor training in an area relevant to the goals of the BRAIN initiative. Describe how the proposed training provides a new research direction for you and how it provides a foundation for a research career that's relevant to the goals of the BRAIN initiative. And talk about documenting plans for didactics to ensure robust grounding in quantitative knowledge, etc. Again, an important section for the mentor to take a look at. I encourage you to read the questions that are posed under each of the scored review criteria in Section 5, because that can give you additional insights into the kind of information you want to provide in your application so that the reviewers can respond in a very affirmative way to the evaluation of the merit of your application. The expectations, there is an additional requirement for both the sponsor's biosketch as well as your biosketch. So do pay attention to those as well. And finally, you want to make sure that you're putting all the required components and that your referees are providing their letters by the due date for the application. If your application is incomplete at that point, unfortunately, it will not be reviewed. Questions, please contact me via email. It's really helpful if you would use the phrase BRAIN F32 as part of the subject line of your email. It helps me sort my email among the various tasks that I am charged with managing here. There's no information on the BRAIN Initiative website, and I'd like to see if there are any questions from folks who are participating. Okay, we have some questions here. Let me see if I can read them. Okay, one of the questions that's asked is it possible to conduct research, F32 research in a foreign country if the home institution is in the United States? That would certainly be possible. Foreign components are allowed. It's also possible to submit an application from a foreign institution so long as you, as the candidate, meet the citizenship requirement. Someone had training potential in the specific aims. I would say no. The tradition at NIH is generally that the specific aims talk about the research. It is on one page. If you have room, I think it would be a nice thing and helpful to the review panel if you mentioned that, but as to what the new skills are that you're going to be learning, but there may not be sufficient space. Okay, here's a question. Is it okay if the primary mentor is the current mentor of a postdoc? Is that the question? So yes, we're discouraging applications where someone whose graduate training is with, say, Dr. Smith. We're discouraging applications for postdoctoral training from someone who did postdoctoral training with Dr. I forgot what I was saying, so I lost track of my sentence. So the bottom line is that if you are currently in a postdoc lab, it's if your F32 sponsor is your current lab PI. If you're currently in a graduate lab and you're proposing postdoctoral training with someone, we're discouraging applications from we're discouraging applicants to think about doing a postdoc with their graduate mentor. Generally, the training potential is rather limited. Okay. It's possible to delay the start of the award in case somebody already has funding in the near term. NIH has policies about activation of a fellowship award. Unlike a research grant, a fellowship doesn't have, it has a date by which it has to start, but it is awarded with a specific start date. We would, although we're expecting that most people will be starting their awards rather quickly. It would depend, my answer to this question would be, it would depend on how long a delay it would be. And that's something that we could discuss via email. Can a proposal overlap with one that was submitted for the December 8th deadline? That would be today. So the question is, can you have an F32 submitted for December 8th and the same project or a very highly related project for the F32 RFA? The answer to that is that you cannot have two applications pending review. Let me get the correct language here. The language that NIH does not accept highly overlapping applications under review at the same time means that if you submitted an application for the December 8th deadline, you need to have your summary statement from that application before submit to the BRAIN Initiative RFA deadline in March. There was another question about what do I mean by acquisition of skills. Simple. If you step back and look at the kind of the areas of neuroscience related to circuits and systems, you'll see, for example, in terms of physiology, that individuals are recording from hundreds and thousands of neurons. And part of the need in terms of acquisition of quantitative skills is the ability to analyze correctly all of that data. There's also a more general example, and that relates to the larger issue of the rigor and reproducibility of scientific results that the NIH has talked much about over the last couple of years. There's a sense that there's insufficient formal education in experimental design and quantitative reasoning that as well as statistics to allow the very foundation of the research to be designed appropriately to lead to rigorous results. A couple of examples, and hopefully that will help answer that question. preferred that the mentor currently have an NIH grant. It is preferred, and reviewers expect that the mentor will have adequate support for the proposed research training that you're going to do, because the fellowship award provides support for you for stipend, health insurance, and a very modest amount of money for the institution. So there should be adequate funding to support you and your research. Generally, reviewers expect to see that the research fund that your sponsor has some relationship to the some general relationship to the topic that you're proposing in your application. Someone wants many specific aims is too many specific aims. Specific aims is too many to accomplish in the requested project period, which would be no more than 3 years. Generally, people propose 2 or 3 specific aims. It depends on the nature of the question and how you're breaking it down into related aims, if you will. So this is the kind of thing that one develops the specific aims. But I would say in general that if you had 4 or 5 aims, that people would probably believe that you are proposing to do work then could be accomplished in the time that would be available to you. So getting back to the question about the overlap with the December 8th deadline, it does mean that you should not submit the same application for the Brain Initiative F32 deadline and to the April 8th F32 deadline unless the applications are very different. So you have to make a choice at that point. Were there any questions here? Contact information. Okay. You can all just Google me and you will find me. Really, it's best to contact me by email rather than by telephone, because that allows me to respond to you at strange hours of the day. How does the requirement of less than 6 months of postdoc experience prevent an application by someone with 1 to 2 years on a T32? That absolutely prevents someone from applying because we're looking at the total amount of postdoctoral experience in terms of the 6-month eligibility window. So if someone spent a year working as a postdoc in their graduate lab, now in month 2 of being in their new postdoc lab, they would unfortunately not be eligible for this opportunity. Wants to know that their engine, they apparently are expected to receive a higher salary than the NIH postdoc salary guideline. Any amount higher than the NIH stipend level for your particular number of years of experience, that amount of additional funding for you can be supplemented by the institution. It cannot come from NIH grants. Other grants, for example, awarded to your sponsor, but that be something that you would want to take up with your with the mentor, or perhaps to discuss with the postdoc office at the institution to see how the institution handles it. there's a recommendation and the kind of individuals they should come from. The quote, sealed letters of recommendation, those that are sent to us individually by the letter writers, those cannot come from any individual who is listed as a sponsor on your fellowship application. They can come from, they could come from individuals you worked with as a graduate student or collaborators, for example, but the proposed sponsor and any proposed co-sponsor writes a letter that is a part of the application itself. So, and those letters do not count part of the 3 required letters of reference. Someone has a rather specific question about the type of anatomical studies that would be competitive for this funding opportunity. And I would say that this is something that we would need to discuss on individually because it's hard to make general statements about what would be considered responsive and what would be considered non-responsive. So the individual who posed this question, I would encourage you to write to me so that we can set up a time to talk about what you're interested in and how that fits in with the BRAIN initiative. Okay, so here's a challenge. If someone asks a question that comes down to, if you haven't settled on the specific lab in which you're going to do your postdoc, how a membership plan? So thing about age fellowship application. The application is going to be submitted by not by you as the applicant. And generally that is by the institution at which you would do the postdoc. So by definition, that forces you to choose to determine the institution and mentor with whom you would want to propose this particular postdoctoral training opportunity. Now, people you were looking at were at the same institution. Well, that might be a little more, you might have a little more flexibility, but you still need to have a very specific research and training plan that is developed by you and the mentor that you're going to work with. So that you may not be, if you're not in the right, if you have it narrowed down the topic area and the person you want to work with, this may be a more challenging funding opportunity for you at this time. So if there are not any more questions, it's my understanding that we're going to, on Blackboard here, that we will be preparing this webinar will be prepared as a YouTube that will be archived, archived on the BRAIN Initiative website. As soon as that is done, we will share that link with all of you, and feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. And two final points. Please contact me with any questions. Attending.